How you doing? Good. Well, last week there were a couple of cliffhangers last week at the end of the talk. Like, would my luggage show up from San Francisco? It decided to spend an extra day at the airport there. Dorian's too, and it did show up. Actually, while we were here, it was appearing at our house. And let's see, what was the other thing that we were talking about? Yeah, what happened to the slides? Because I left them home. Well, here they are. So it all works out. So I think this is called part two. I think actually this would be part one, and part two was last week, but don't worry. So this just initially just a couple of scenes. If you haven't been up to Asilomar, which is again it's a conference center and nature preserve at the very tip of the Monterey Peninsula. It's just one of the most beautiful places. And this is Merrill Hall. That's where that video, by the way, that video is about as close as we get. That's a religious science rosary is what that was as we did that. But this is looking at the room from up near the stage. Built a long time ago. It's probably close to 100 years old. And this was the Cosmic Kids Choir that performed before that number you just saw, Dr. Susan. And this was Lisa Ferraro and Tammy Hall, who's giving a real evil eye here, but she was one of the musicians during the week, and she's played at Carnegie Hall. She's headlining the Monterey Jazz Festival in September, and she came down spent the whole week with us, playing these amazing piano riffs and so forth. So that was nice. That was out on the deck before dinner one night, and that's Lisa conducting the choir there. And then some of the music team. There are about 17 or 18 musicians and performers that are part of the team during the week. Emily Zoll right here, she came out of our Cosmic Kids program and the youth program, and now she's one of the featured singers. She's really, really good. And Sunny Day right here, it was her first time with us. She was just amazing. She performs at Agape a lot. I did a lot of photo bombing during the conference. This is some of the folks from Kansas City, and actually she's from Dallas, she's from Kansas City, and I think she's from Kansas City. And they were taking a picture, so why not? So this is some of our group in line for dinner. Okay. And then at dinner, okay, at Crocker Hall. And John and Jen and Addie at dinner in Crocker Hall. Another photo bomb, you can't. No comment. And as far as I can tell, there was no alcohol in those drinks either, but I'm not sure. There's Steve Rambo and Reverend Valerie Reese. Steve will be with us next Sunday. He had just done that. They do a thing. I'll show a picture in a minute. I think where they walk the meadow, and he was one of the newly licensed ministers this year. And this is some of the practitioners from various parts of the country. This young woman, I don't remember her name, but she spoke. She had a 5-minute talk that was just phenomenal, and just some really great people there. This is in the meadow, so Reverend Karen Fry right here had just walked the meadow. There's Dorian there, and you decide who your family's going to be, and when they come in, they have to do their final interview, and this is a tradition that came out of the United Church side. So your family goes up with you to the interview, and they stand outside in prayer during about a 45-minute to an hour interview, and then when you come out, you come back and you walk the meadow. And you come through this archway that's created there, and everybody cheers and supports and celebrates and everything. So there were 21 new ministers this year that walked the meadow, and all of the international ministers who were there who had never walked the meadow walked the meadow. So I got to walk the meadow for the first time, and it was pretty cool. That's coming through the archway. She was happy. That's Reverend Gregory Toole. He's the director of education and support services at our office in Golden, Colorado. And then some shots of the beach. And these will just kind of run as we go. Some shots of the beach and grounds. So this idea, there is one life, that life is God's life, that life is perfect, that life is my life now, is really one of the essential ideas, the essential components, I guess you would say, of our teaching. On Monday morning in chapel, like at 7 a.m. Chapel service, Reverend John McLean from Los Angeles talked about the basic ideas, the basic energy of the teaching. And, you know, what is the teaching? He says the teaching is basically that we are all part of a divine unfolding, and that we bring into our experience of life the capacity to be creative, the capacity to use our thoughts and our feelings to, these don't seem to be advancing. They were supposed to advance, but every now and then just advance it. The capacity to use our thoughts and feelings to, in a co-creative flow, to express ourselves at the highest level of our being. So like the flower naturally expresses itself because it doesn't have the intellectual capacity we do, it's kind of easier to express what you are, the more simple you are. But the more complex the creature becomes, the more there is in terms of, what's the term? It's more possibility of choice. The more can go wrong, I guess you could say. So we are charged with the recognition that we are part of a divine flow. There's only one thing happening here. I saw a thing on today, I think it was Marianne Williamson posted on Facebook, said a good way to look at your relationship to God is like the sun, a sunbeam to the sun. No matter how far you get from the sun, you're still part of it. So we are like those God beams, if you will. And so is everything else. And we all have evolved into some way of expressing, and that contains within it everything we need in terms of who we are to be and how we are to be that. The opening of the heart, which was such a big part of this conference, as Patty pointed out, not just it before her treatment, but you heard it during her treatment, is so essential. You know, the brain is a secondary organ. The intellect is secondary to the wisdom within. And the wisdom we've always talked about as human beings, wisdom coming from the heart. That there's that inner knowing, that intuitive awareness. And you know, science is now confirming that the heart has more neurons attached to it than any other organ in your body. So the intellect need to work in harmony. I once heard a talk called The Longest Journey, and it was the 18 inches from head to heart. To bring those into alignment, to bring your intellectual knowing and intellectual capacity in alignment with your internal wisdom and knowing. And we have that inner guide, don't we? You know, Joseph Campbell says, you know when you're on the beam and you know when you're off the beam. You may not know how to deal with that. You may not know what to do about it, but we know. Even when we're in deep denial about some elements of our lives, we know whether we're in balance or not. We know whether we're coherent or not. And it's not just about being accepted by others. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about knowing within yourself that you are in that true way of being. There's no one you need to satisfy in your life other than you. And the interesting thing is, what we find is when you do get into alignment, when you do find that balance, when you do live from that heart wisdom, using your intellect to guide it wisely, you become of great service to others. You become available as a loving being. You become open. You know, we talked about a lot during the conference, and it would continually happen, of people cracking open. Because, it really is that way. Because don't we protect ourselves from that as we go through our ordinary lives, everyday lives? Don't we kind of try to keep from opening up that wide because we're so afraid of losing control? It feels like if my heart opens, I won't know what to do. I don't know what'll happen. So sometimes you find yourself, when it starts to happen, you find yourself trying to control it. When I was in that room listening to that chant, and I think I described, I was having this cathartic, physical, emotional thing going on, and the voice inside, one of the many voices inside my head was saying, "Stop this now. Don't let this happen. Open your eyes. Move around. Break whatever's going on so that you don't," because it felt like I was falling off a cliff. And everything, not everything, but much of what was in me was trying to get me to snap out of it. And I thought back to a time when I was dropping my daughter off at kindergarten class. And for the first time. And as I was pulling out of the lot, I was on my way to work. I was in my police uniform and everything. This kind of sense of wanting to cry kind of welled up in me. And I remember having that argument again, whether to let it happen or not. And then that time I didn't. And then jump forward to Asilomar about 10 or 12 years ago. We had a Raya Mountain Dreamer there who wrote The Invitation and a couple of other things. And she did this workshop. And the workshop talked about this idea of how we want to keep ourselves from revealing who we really are, not because we're afraid that it's not enough, but because we're afraid it's too much. And she talked about, we have a word, and sometimes the word is what we need to do, but we don't do it. And her word was rest. And she said what's associated with that word that you need to do, but you can't do, is an irrational belief. And she said for her, they had just moved, and she had her husband and her son, and she was trying to get everything unpacked in one day, and it was like 11 o'clock, and then it was 12 o'clock at night, and the two men said, "We're going to bed." And she kept working, and she was exhausted, and came to her. She said, "Why can't I just rest?" And she said, what came up for me was, this very clear voice within, if I rest, people will die. Totally irrational. But she believed it at some level. She believed it at some level, and it took away her capacity to act in a different way until that awareness came up. When I took that workshop, I knew my word was cry. And the belief for me was, if I start crying, I'll never stop. And that'll be the end. So it was this dynamic. So that came up again and again this particular week at this particular conference, which was actually designed to be a heartfelt experience by those who created it. And there were lots of opportunities to have that kind of an experience. There always are there, but this was particularly so. And it's interesting, since then on the Ministers Field Web, where we do an email thing and people talk about stuff, and there's been a lot of talk about, should we create more of these heartfelt, should this be more of a heartfelt movement? Should we be doing that? And it's interesting, the people that love the heartfelt stuff said, of course, and the people that don't like it said, no, we have to stick to what the founders wanted, which is we just think. Maybe we should think in tongues. I know last week there were a number of people that came up. We had a fairly heartfelt service, probably more than usual. That was probably my fault. Sorry, but I was just in that space, and it's a good space to be in. I find with my background, I guess, and my conditioning, it's not an easy space for me to maintain, quite honestly. It's much easier to be stoic and talk about ideas and things like that, which I think we need to do too. We don't want, I think it needs to be a balance. What do we do with the affairs of the heart? How do you run a society if everybody's going to walk around dealing with their feelings all the time? And the truth is, if we don't direct our feelings by thinking in ways that are uplifting and positive, that cause us to create a consciousness of the deep realization of our own inner value, your emotions can take you straight to hell. So it's not just about letting the emotions out. It's really about, I think, authoring or creating within yourself a coherent heart, a coherent realization within your mind and your heart that it's all the same thing happening. That I have to rely more on the inner wisdom than I do on the intellect. The intellect's good, but the intellect will believe anything. The intellect will, if I see something that looks like something that resonates with me, I'll believe it. It may have no bearing in truth at all. The heart knows. The heart knows pretty unfailingly what the truth is. But you've got to get to that level of heart that is that intuitive self, because most of us in our lives, the way our culture works and trains us, we build a layer between that intuitive knowing and the intellect. And that layer is fear. That layer is, don't let anything go wrong. Stay in control. Fake it till you make it. Don't do anything that would embarrass you or make you stand out or whatever it is. We all have different temperaments. And then the feelings that come up from that layer we mistake for our wisdom. But it's not. It's a more surface level set of beliefs that are fear-based and that don't ultimately serve us, other than maybe to keep us in line socially. You know what to wear, pretty much. You don't stand out too much, or you stand out a lot, whatever it is that, whatever you're seeking. This is L.A., we like to be looked at, or we're afraid we're being looked at. But we're looking at other people, so they must be looking at us, right? So see what you get into all these kinds of craziness. What I know is I sat in that Merrill Hall at that time with that song, and it was a different experience in terms of the way the sound waves came at you than through the iPhone, as good as it was there, but it was a different experience. And those vibrations increased, and point where you can watch in one point of the video where the whole place is shaking. Yeah, I know you were shaking too, but everything was shaking. John here took the video. But there was at one point where I just said, screw it, and let go. I let go of that precipice I felt like I was hanging over. I just let go and let myself fall into whatever that experience was going to be. I figured, what can happen? And it's not like I've never had that kind of an experience before, so it wasn't totally new. But it was scary nonetheless. It was scary in that instant to let go, but as soon as I let go, it became okay. It became 50 times more than it had been 2 seconds before. And this incredible experience of having this light rise up through me and this realization come up through me that it was just wow. And at the end of the video, you can see it. We didn't play the whole thing, but at the end of the video, everybody stands up, and John was about 3 people away from me, and I think I stood up. I was the last one to stand up. I couldn't stand up when it ended. I couldn't clap. I was just kind of... So how do we create a space for that to happen? Where it's safe. Where there's a support for it. Where you're not going to be too concerned that you're going to fall off that cliff and never be able to come back. You know, how do we do that? How do we do that? And I think the answer is community. The answer is spiritual community, what we call the Sanskrit term sangha, which is spiritual community. Doesn't mean we all think the same thing. Doesn't mean we all dress the same way. It means we support one another on our individualized paths toward the realization of our own greatest understanding of ourselves. Knowing that mine will be different than yours to some degree. You know, people often ask, you may be asked sometimes, are you in a cult? I say, no, cults are way more organized than we are. We're not organized enough to be a cult. Cults, usually people do what the leader says. That doesn't happen here. A little bit, but not much. You know, not enough to qualify us as a cult. In fact, we're anything but, because it's about realizing your own inner intelligence, not adapting someone else's idea of what reality is and having to march lockstep within it. Because that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, we could all, we could decree it that when you come on Sunday, you'll wear a certain outfit and everyone will look the same, and we'll have things that we recite together, and we could do all that stuff, and it looks like you're in unison, but you're not. The diversity in a true spiritual community will be incredibly diverse. Not just in the way people look, but in the way they think and feel and experience life. Because each of us is that unique expression of the one. You know, to say everybody should be thinking and acting the same way would say, like, I want a body, but I only want liver cells. So I'd be one big liver, right? You know, no, my body has, what is it, something like 15 trillion cells or 150 trillion million, oh, and a ton of cells. And there's hundreds and thousands of different kinds. Some of them aren't even me. You know, you're not an individual, you're a community. About 30% of your body mass is made up of organisms that aren't really you. So, I hope that doesn't bother you. But they support you. If they left, you wouldn't continue to exist, see, as the being you are. So we see the value of that diversity within the community that each of us is physically, but sometimes we don't see the value of that diversity when we come together in community in a social or a spiritual or a business setting. We want everyone to think alike, and we think it's important we get everybody on the same page, and that's the only way we can go forward. But in reality, the way we can go forward is for each of us to realize their own unique gifts and then contribute it. And then you get a much richer experience of life and what is possible. You have to put up with more stuff. You have to work on becoming okay with the differences that people bring. With people that are convinced that something is true that you don't think is true, and vice versa. That's part of what's required. And we see what happens when we don't do that, when we don't expand that capacity. We go to war. That's what war's about. You need to see things the way I do. If you don't, I'm going to conquer you, or I'm going to blow you up, or I'm going to whatever, you know. Why? Because I'm so afraid that difference means someone is against me. I'm so afraid that someone's different idea may invalidate my own. As opposed to celebrating the difference. So, this week at Asilomar, for those that were there, and I'm sure there were as many different experiences, 500 and some people were there. There were probably 500 and some different experiences. But see, that's the interesting thing. We each experience what we're prepared to experience in the way that we're prepared to experience. So Asilomar, that conference becomes a container that you can go into and be free to have whatever experience you're ready to have, or not. And the same thing here, when you come here for service, or you come here for classes, or you come here to be part of a service project, or meeting in a group. To be able to be who you are, to be in the process of giving yourself permission to really move into that authentic self. And the authentic self is that deeply authentic self. Your authentic self is a beautiful being. So if there's a part of you that doesn't think that and wants to lash out at the world and think that's authentic, no, that's that surface piece again. That's that self-defense mechanism that we create. As Byron Katie says, I'll say this every week, I think, if a thought doesn't feel good, it's a false thought. Why, she's just a jerk. That's a false thought. It's not true. If you say she is or he is or I am and it's anything other than love, then it's not true. Because the truth of our being is we're just love. We're just love. That's all we are. That's it. And if you're going to wait for the rest of the world to give you permission to act on that, you're going to wait a long time. The courage to stand in it now, no matter what other people say in your lives. And many of you, I know you've gone through stuff with your family about being part of this spiritual path because they're worried about you, they're praying for you, they're gunning for you, something's going on, you know. They just wish you wouldn't talk about it. That's okay. It's okay. Each of us is where we need to be on our path right now. We've got to allow that and got to say, that doesn't diminish me. That doesn't diminish me that we're not the biggest teaching in the world. Matter of fact, we're not a small religion. We're an insignificant religion. If you took all of us in Centers for Spiritual Living, it's not that many people. It's a couple 100,000 people on the whole planet. That's it. So if you need to be with a bigger group of people, right now the folks that believe in fear have the bigger groups. Not that they're wrong and we're right or anything, it's just the way it is right now. I mean, you can be here and be afraid. Right? Anybody ever been afraid? Anyone? Ever? Yeah. But here we recognize that that's something to move through and move beyond and learn from, not something to dwell in, not something to demand of others. So the wisdom from Asilomar is the wisdom is it's in you. It doesn't matter whether you've ever been to Asilomar. It doesn't matter if you ever go to a conference or you ever do anything anybody else does. The wisdom is already within you, and only you can give yourself permission to have the experiences necessary to bring it forth. Whatever that is for you. To laugh more, to cry more, to be willing to be in that feeling space rather than being afraid of it. To recognize that what we're really seeking is to align head and heart. To align. Alignment, coherence equals thriving. When you align those two things, you thrive. And when you thrive, you help others to thrive, just by being who you are. So I invite you to say yes to your inner self, that inner wisdom, in a bigger way maybe than you ever have before. Be willing to, as my dear friend Dr. Arlene Bump says, to step out on the skinny branches of life and take the risk of letting people know you love them and that you are loved and that you know they are too. Thank you, and namaste.